Hi, I'm Lillian. Welcome back to my channel, Ink and Pages. Today I'm going to be telling you about the final 7 books I read in 2024, starting with The Death of Mrs Westaway by Ruth Ware. This is a mystery thriller about a young woman who has fallen on hard times, but then when she gets misidentified as a relative to this Mrs Westaway character, she is told that she has been left something in her will, and so she sort of goes off to the will reading and bequeathal bit of the process to try and keep up this pretense and hopefully get her hands on some money. But there's lots of other mysteries happening. The whole family is quite mysterious, and then she also knows that her mum, who's died, never spoke about her family, so she's wondering, could I actually be related to this family? If so, how, and how does that play into things? Because there's a lot of unspoken things, there's a lot of intrigue, and I just found this quite dull. I think I'm realizing the more mystery thriller, like crime books I read, I'm realizing that I don't really enjoy the ones where the mystery is slow and the aim is to build tension and intrigue very slowly throughout the story. I like ones that are more interesting and have sort of higher stakes and a higher pace of action right from the off, and this just wasn't that. Some parts felt quite tense, but mostly it was just plodding on and I was really bored. Even the final climax where everything gets revealed and things kick up a notch, I didn't enjoy. There was one twist which I thought was so obvious from the start, like from the moment I started reading the book almost, I guessed that this piece of information was going to be revealed, and then it was at the end, and I was like, well, obviously that was going to be the case, because I had guessed one element of the mystery right from the beginning, so that was just, it was just disappointing, which was a shame. Another thing I didn't really like was there are these little inserts from a diary from a character who lived years before the main story takes place, and I think the point of these little fragments of diary were to be creepy and to build intrigue, but they were just really pointless and dull and had no bearing upon the actual plot. I think it would have been better if there was something within them that then turned out to be relevant, or like a reference to something, or even the language used in them helps the reader understand a big revelation at the perfect moment later on, or turns out they had clues hidden within it the whole time. But no, they were just kind of pointless. The other thing I took away from this book is that, do people find magpies creepy? Because I do not find magpies creepy, and there was lots of imagery and references to magpies within this book, and I was like, are you including magpies to be scary, to be spooky? What's the deal with that? I really like magpies. I love magpies. If I see a magpie in the morning on my way to work, I'm like, oh great, gonna have a great day. So that really threw me off, and I realized, oh, she's including references to magpies because it's meant to be spooky, and that did not work for me. So yeah, this one was just quite disappointing. Didn't have a good time reading it, didn't have a good time at the end. I read it so long ago now, I barely remember it, and that's probably for the best. Next, I reread The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And actually later in the year, I read the sequel, which I'll talk about now. That sequel, the second book in the 5-part series, is The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Here's my hot take on this series. There is no plot. Things happen, but you cannot tell what is going to happen at any time. Sequences of events very rarely lead on from something that happened before. So don't go in expecting to be wowed by the plot, because what plot? The main draw of this series, and is the reason I'm still reading it, is the writing style. It is so fun and silly and creative in crazy ways that it is the draw of this series, and it's what I'm really enjoying. And so even when I was reading them, I mean, honestly, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy kind of has a semblance of a plot. This second one, what the fuck was even happening? I have no idea. Why did it end there? Why did anything happen? I can't say. But even when I was reading it and I was getting a bit annoyed, or I was noticing that the plot was making no sense and I couldn't understand why anything was happening, I'd then find a sentence that would make me laugh out loud, and it was just absolutely hilarious. And I'm not someone who often stops to take pictures of quotes or to write them down or to text them to my dad if I think they're particularly funny. But I was doing it so often when reading these books. And so I am going to keep going with the series because it is overall a good time. But I would say that is definitely the main draw. To be honest, these books were kind of at a disadvantage because I just wasn't really having a great time as I was reading them. It took me like 2 months to read this tiny book. What is it, like 200 pages? Less than 200 pages, and it took me ages to read this. I was reading this physical book. I got an ebook of it to read on the go. I tried listening to the audiobook at one point. Can't do that on the tube in London. It's too loud. I was bursting my eardrums trying to hear it. And then Restaurant at the End of the Universe took me even longer. I think it took me like 5 months. I literally think it took me 5 months to read this. So I wasn't having a good time, but the writing is fun and the writing was cheering me up. So that is what I will say. This is, I didn't even say, a classic sci-fi series which begins with the Earth being destroyed to make a motorway for space. But yeah, this second book, it finishes. It doesn't finish. It just sort of ends. And I was like, okay, that was a choice. We'll see what happens in book 3. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I first read this in year 12. Yeah, I read it in sixth form because we were doing a module on like Gothic literature or something, and this was included. And even then, I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. I didn't like classics. I still don't tend to. But I could recognise even at 16, like, oh, this is a classic which is not awful. And now rereading it, I liked it even more. It was actually like pretty good, really good. A special shout out, and the only reason I think that I enjoyed this as much as I did was the audiobook I was listening to was narrated by the actress Joanne Froggatt, who plays Anna in Downton Abbey. And this audiobook, her narration was incredible. She has the perfect accent for this. She was doing all the voices. There's one side character who speaks in like a sort of Yorkshire dialect, which reading at school, I could not understand what was going on. But having someone actually from that area read it aloud to you, I could understand it all of a sudden, and it was great. Shout out to her. I want to read more Bronte books now. I think I would quite like to reread Jane Eyre. So if Joanne Froggatt, if she could do the audiobook of Jane Eyre as well, that would be incredible. The story of Wuthering Heights itself is very famous. Classic Gothic tale. I heard in the introduction to this book that when it was published, the violence in it was considered quite like shocking and scandalous to Victorian society, which when you compare it to some of the like crime dramas and stuff that are on TV now and some of the violence in books, like it doesn't compare. But actually some of the scenes in this were actually still quite shocking. There's one bit with like a toddler, and the risk to the toddler within the scene was like actually quite scary and shocking in that way. So I was pleased that I was able to still react in that way to the book. It is well written and interesting. A little bit, some of it drags on, but that's just what old-fashioned books were like. And so yeah, I'm glad that I reread this. I listened to the audiobook while doing a puzzle called The World of the Brontes. And it was a really good time, and it was really fun doing the puzzle while listening to the story and seeing the references within it. So yeah, I'm really, really glad that I came back to this, 10, 15 years later, and had such a good time with it. And yeah, I would quite like to now listen to the audiobook of Jane Eyre or something else. Like, those are the only 2 Bronte books I've read. I haven't read any of the other ones. But maybe if Joanne Froggatt decided to narrate the audiobooks for them, I would. Next was another reread. I reread Trouble by Lex Croucher. I first read this in summer 2023 on my summer holiday, absorbed it in one day, almost a single sitting, absolutely loved it, 5 stars, was my favourite read of 2023. So then in summer 2024, I decided to pick it up again and have another great time, which I did. This is a Regency romance about a woman called Emily who impersonates her sister in order to take up a job as a governess because her sister is too ill to do it, but they really need the money. So Emily goes off to be the governess for a grumpy Navy captain and his 2 children. And I loved Emily so much because she is so grumpy. She is grumpy, she is often rude and antisocial, and I just loved that. That maybe doesn't sound like the perfect recipe for a great main character in a story, but I absolutely loved it. I loved that she was grumpy. I loved that what's his name, Captain Edwards, was grumpy. I loved the whole thing pretty much. I didn't quite feel the same intense feverish love towards it as I did the first time round. There are a couple more things I noticed. There's like a side plot involving theft, shall we say, which I just like didn't really care for. I was like, this is detracting from the main appeal. I want to get back to Emily and her being in the house and that dynamic, and that's the best bit for it. And I really tend to really enjoy Lex Croucher's works. I think they're a great author. This is still my favourite one of their books, I think. And I would just highly recommend it if honestly anything I've just said sounds interesting. I think this is inspired by Sound of Music, I would say, because of like the whole like governess element. The setup is quite similar to Sound of Music. But yeah, I love it so much. This is such a good book. Read it. Next was actually another reread and another audiobook. I listened to The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a super famous book about a hobbit guy who goes on an adventure with a wizard and some dwarves to a mountain and a dragon, and he finds a magic ring along the way. We all know this. The audiobook was read by Andy Serkis, who is the actor who plays Gollum in the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films, but they're less good, so we don't talk about them. And it was interesting to listen to the audiobook because it felt less like he was reading it to you and more like he was fully performing it. And that might sound good, but for me, I struggled a bit because sometimes he was just yelling really loudly. And I am not a sound engineer, but I'm like, someone in the recording booth should be turning a dial to mean that I wasn't constantly having to turn down the volume when it was like a yelling scene or like a loud scene, or he was getting really passionate about dwarf song or something. And it was really annoying because I did have to keep turning the volume down and then up again afterwards, which took out the magic slightly. That's just a little production note for the team behind this. But other than that, it was a really great audiobook. He did all the voices, obviously did Gollum's voice great. He sung all the songs. It was a very immersive, fun time. And it was also fun to kind of compare and contrast this book and its tone to The Lord of the Rings, because it has a very different tone, but obviously is set within the same world, within the same continuity and mythology. And that was just interesting. And also shout out to this book because shortly after I read it, I went to a Lord of the Rings pub quiz in Brixton, and there were a few questions specifically all about The Hobbit, which I smashed because of this. We actually came, I think, third. Oh, actually no, where did we come? I think we came fifth, but actually upon checking a question afterwards, we should have come third. But it was a really fun time, and shout out to this book for helping us get a few extra points. And then finally, well, not my final read of the year. My final read of the year was actually The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. But final read we'll talk about in this video is The Celts, Search for Civilization by Alice Roberts. I picked this up because I thought it was going to be a straightforward book about the Celts, and it was going to tell us about them because I never read a book on the Celts, and I thought, oh, I would like to read a book about the Celts, so I bought this. This instead turned out to be more on the archaeology behind our knowledge of the Celts, and it talks a lot about specific like treasure troves and specific finds and locations and burial sites and like Iron Age bodies and stuff that we found, and then talking about how we extrapolate from those finds the knowledge and the information that we think we have about the Celts. So it's more about archaeology than being about the Celts themselves, but it was still very interesting. But it actually took me so long to read this book. I started this back in October 2023 and then only finished it in December 2024. So it was a long time coming. It's not that long a book, it's under 300 pages. I felt the middle section dragged a little bit, but just towards the end, she started talking a bit about Celtic mythology and Celtic language. And those are two of my big interests. So I really, really liked that aspect and that like final sort of final quarter of the book. And so yeah, it was still a fun time, even though I am not someone who is interested in archaeology, which did kind of turn out to be the main focus of this book. So I think I would recommend this, not if it's the first book you're ever reading about Celts, my bad, but if you already know a bit about them, give this a go. Or if you are interested in archaeology in general, give this a go. Or like, if you have read books about ancient Egypt, for example, and thought, oh, how do we know what we know? And then you're interested in that element and the archaeological side, maybe give this a go. I really liked how at the end there was a book of suggested, a chapter of suggested further reading for people who are interested in the subject, which is me. So I actually wrote down quite a lot of the book titles from that final page and would be interested in reading some of them in the future. So that was my last read of 2024. I didn't read that much over the year. I finished 13 books, so it was a bit of a lower reading year for me, and that's fine. Obviously, I didn't read enough to do like a separate favourites and least favourites video between this wrap up and my previous wrap up. Those are all of my thoughts on the books I read. And I'm not going to say, oh, I want to read so much more in 2025, because I don't. I'm not going to have a numerical goal. I think I just want to read good books and books I really enjoy and books I find interesting and surprising, and yeah, that's more of my goal. I would like to set my reading goal on Goodreads as one book. I would like to, but every time I go on the app and try and do that, I get an error message. Sort your shit out, Goodreads. It has been long enough and your shit is still not sorted. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.